what they have to offer us. And I must mention not only Ahmed, Ishrat, and giving the other name, Atia. Okay, all these four students, they made such an effort. I just encourage them. And on behalf of the Institute of Asian Research and Center for the India and South Asian Research, I give it to Ahmed.
So I would not take much of your time now, I'll jump right into our discussion. We have some students, some brilliant students, and some professors who will be reciting and discussing class tonight. We are expecting to go till 7, but I assure you that we have some very great speakers, so you won't be bored. And so our first speaker tonight is a UBC alumnus. She went on to pursue a master's degree from Columbia University in Middle East, South Asian and African Studies. She's an avid reader of Urdu poetry and a great admirer of Faiz. So please join me in welcoming Nabila Pirani.
Right. So at every event, 2 students will be asked to give either the ta'aruf or the thanks at the end, the shukriya. And so I got very excited because, you know, it's the first female executive member of this large organization, and so I dressed up in my nice daily shalwar kameez and, you know, wrote her introduction in flowery Urdu with the help of one of our instructors. And when the day came, went up to the front and was about to deliver my introduction when she looks at me and she says, "Beta, aapka naam kya hai?" And obviously I said, "Nabila, what else am I supposed to say?" She looks at me, she smiles, and she says, "Oh, you're a Muslim," and turned back to her papers. Now, the story proceeds. It actually gets a lot worse. By the end of it, I was the representative, or a representative, of everything that's gone bad with Muslims who have gone off to America and veered off the Sirat al-Mustaqim. But I won't get into that story right now. That's not the point. The point is that she heard my name, heard the Muslimness inherent in my name, and assumed that it was a fundamental marker of my identity. And so how does this all relate to Faiz? I think we're doing the same thing. We listen to his poetry, which is the Nabila in this case, hear the political leanings and the message inherent in his poetry, which is that Muslimness, and treat that Muslimness or that political message as the fundamental and the only marker of his identity. In the case of Nabila, the Muslimness isn't the fundamental marker of the identity. It's a key part. In the case of Faiz, the political is also a key part, but not necessarily the fundamental marker of his identity. Now, of course, in my opinion, this is a problem that arises whenever 2 disparate identities come together and become so intertwined that disjoining them again is impossible. So what do we do? Obviously, Faiz's poetry is full of political leanings, his socialist ideology, his desire to bring to light various oppressions, injustices, and that's not a bad thing. But he also emphasizes different parts in his poetic works. And at the end of the day, Faiz was never a politician. He was not a revolutionary in the most common sense of the word. Faiz was and is a poet. So, where am I going with all this? My question to you all, and the issue I'd like you all to think about as we progress through this evening, is how do we, and even do we, attempt to look at Faiz as a poet? Or should we continue to emphasize the political messages contained within his poetry and put aside things like his political devices, flow, ravani, motifs, images, tropes, as I mentioned, that have been brought into his work from the world of the classical Urdu ghazal? And maybe most importantly, have we come so far in a specific interpretation of Faiz that we are no longer able to appreciate his poetry for his poetry? And if the answer is no, then when you listen to the various poems being presented this evening, I ask that you listen to the political messages inherent within most of them, because issues of oppression and injustice still occur in this world, but also listen to the beauty of his poetry.
That Faiz had a role in redeeming the world of the 18th and early 19th century Urdu, primarily ghazal, but of course only some of Faiz's poems are ghazals, but redeeming that particular world of the ashiq and the mashuq, the world of Kuch Ishq, which was really the only subject that classical Urdu poetry took seriously. That he redeemed that he brought it into the modern period, that he assigned it a particular slot of the private voice, and then worked to evolve out of that a new style of poetry for a public voice that he felt had been lacking. And the second thing, that partially because of Faiz, there is a cultural possibility now of discourse in poetry that enormously empowers the cultures of North India and Pakistan. So on the, well, I wanted to tell a brief anecdote. A little over 30 years ago, I owned a car, an aging Ford Pinto, the worst car I ever owned. But this particular Ford Pinto had a secret that made it worthwhile. In the secret compartment was the ashtray in the dashboard. And in that ashtray, closed to the world, lived a cigarette butt, left there by the hand and the mouth of the great Urdu poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz. And that cigarette became for me this icon. It struck me as being the Shama of Urdu poetry. Always in Urdu poetry we create the world as a mahfil, like tonight's mahfil, as an assembly of good, literate, and pleasure-loving friends who sit together and recite poetry and get drunk. And the next morning, there are many poems of the morning after. The next morning, what's left are wine bottles empty, hungover bodies spread around the floor, and always, always the iconic shama, the candle that the night before was attracting every moth in the room, and they were flying to their suicide, to their death into the candle. But now the candle is burned down. There's nothing left but a stump with a little bit of smoke. And that is the sign of life the morning after. And this is what we all have to look forward to. And that cigarette butt, I would periodically, at times when I needed some encouragement from the world, I would open that ashtray and look at that cigarette butt, no longer smoking, that had somehow the power of the darshan to change cultures here of Faiz. And I read a lot about Faiz now that I had his cigarette butt, his candle. There is a very famous poem by Faiz. I considered not reading it just because everybody knows it. But it too much makes the point that I'm trying to make, or rather the point I'm trying to make comes from this poem in Faiz, where he has a conversation with a beloved, with a mehboob. But that beloved at the same time as perhaps being a human mehboob, perhaps being his wife, Alice, who, by the way, was the sister of the wife of Shaheed Salman Taseer, who was killed, assassinated a few months ago, the governor of Punjab. And Salman Taseer's father married, performed the wedding ceremony for Faiz and his Marxist English wife, Alice. Perhaps this poem is addressed to the many mehboob of Alice, or of some other lover that we don't know about of Faiz, but it's also addressed, I suggest to you, to the whole tradition of Urdu poetry, to that classical tradition. And what he says, the poem is going to be divided into halves, and the first half says, he says, my beloved, don't ask from me that old kind of love, the kind of love that we used to have, pehli si mohabbat. And by that he means maybe the kind of love that he had when he was obsessed with a young wife, but also the kind of love that North India had, that Pakistan had at one point with the mashuq of the classical tradition. And he describes briefly what that love was like. If I had you, I had everything. If you smiled, it was springtime, no matter what the time of year. Everything revolved around you. And if I was unhappy because of you, I didn't care anything for wars or revolutions or the jagare of this world. But he says, actually, that wasn't how it was. I just wanted things to be that way. I wanted it to be that way. But then he says, there are other sorrows in life besides the sorrow of love. There are other joys in life besides the joy of love. And he goes on then to describe, to make a very dark descent into a world in which bodies are sold in the streets, and the bodies that are sold are covered in dust and blood. And they are bodies that emerge from the tandoor, the ovens of diseases, and bodies that have open sores with peep behti hui, with flowing pus. And finally says, look, I can't help it. Kya kijiye? My eyes can't stay on you all the time. My eyes turn to this other world. I can't help it. And he says that your beauty is still as great as it ever was. I still am attracted by you. It's not that you've lost your attraction, but there's that other world out there that also pulls me now to make a coup, start a journal, to do something to change it. Kya kijiye? There are other sorrows in the world besides the sorrow of love. Okay, I'm going to read that poem, and then I'm going to read another poem that I'm not going to have time to talk about, but the poem Heart Attack, which was first brought to my attention by my friend Haider. मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरे महबूब न मांग, मैंने समझा था कि तू है तो दरख्शां है हयात, तेरा गम है तो गम दहर का झगड़ा क्या है, तेरी सूरत से है आलम में बहारों को सबात, तेरी आंखों के सिवा दुनिया में रखा क्या है, तू जो मिल जाए तो तकदीर निगूं हो जाए। यूं ना था, मैंने फकत चाहा था कि यूं हो जाए, और भी दुख हैं जमाने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वसल की राहत के सिवा। अनगिनत सदियों की तारीख बहिमाना तलस्म, रेशम वतलस व कम ख्वाब में बुनवाए हुए, जा बजा बिकते हुए कूचे व बाजार में जिस्म, खाक में लिथड़े हुए खून में नहलाए हुए, जिस्म निकले हुए अमराज के तन्नूरों से, पीप बहती हुई गलते हुए नासूरों से, लौट जाती है उधर को भी नजर, क्या कीजिए अब भी दिलकश है तेरा हुस्न, मगर क्या कीजिए और भी दुख हैं जमाने में मोहब्बत के सिवा, राहतें और भी हैं वसल की राहत के सिवा, मुझसे पहली सी मोहब्बत मेरे महबूब नमा।
How much blood do you need, O earth of my land? to make your sallow cheeks glow with life. How many sighs will cool your heart, and how many tears will turn your deserts into gardens? ख्वाब कितनी तेरी शहराओं में संसार हुए, and how many dreams lie shattered in your streets, your kuche, your galiyan, and your bazaar. So let's go back to the story of that young boy, the one with the scrawny legs, for we have already imagined him in our story. And as a tradition, we also must name him. We must name him so that we recognize him and identify him. For in bazaar, you see, the conditions are usually such that bane hain ahle havas, muddai bhi, munsif bhi, kisse wakil karen, kisse munsafi chahen. For the tyrant now has become both judge and the prosecutor. What are your lovers to do, with no one to defend them and no judge to do justice? Therefore, we must keep an eye on the small boy as he crosses the street. His name is Mehboob, for he is a lover. The year is 1984, the year of systematic torture, public flogging, draconian laws, sectarian violence, but mostly the year when Faiz left us. An outcry is born. An outcry is born at the injustices that plunge the heart of his aggrieved nation, with international community citing reports of military courts deciding cases in minutes and refusing defendants the rights to lawyers. Riots are becoming whirlwinds and people mere silhouettes. And in the midst of all this stands a young man, our Mehboob, with scrawny legs and parched hands.
I can't recall when I first saw Faiz, but I recall when I last saw him. and that was in 80 or 81 in Islamabad in the office of Daily Muslim. And he was sitting there with Alice Faiz, and I was there, and we were all three of us waiting for the editor of Muslim. So I said to Faiz, I said, look, they fired me again from this job. I got fired from Associated Press of Pakistan because I released a story that I shouldn't have. And so they fired me because I was in the first 3 months where you can be fired without any penalty. So I lost that job, and I knew that it was really hard for me to get any other job, because in General Zia's period, the job market for people like me had totally squeezed out. So I was like, really, I said, look, I was very tired of looking for jobs, at that point. And I said to him, I said, look, what do I have to do? They fired me again. And he looked at me and he said, फिकर नहीं कर, हमें भी तो जगह जगह से नौकरी से जवाब दिए कि I was time and again fired from different jobs, but look where I am now. And, yeah, so that kind of gave me a lot of courage at that point, and I thought, yeah, what shit, I don't need any job, especially not with Associated Press of Pakistan. But that day I did get a job, and that was with Daily Muslim as a staff reporter. So that was my last meeting with Faiz. Faiz and Alice Faiz were kind of very protective of me, because I was in the mid-70s, I was maybe the youngest journalist working in Lahore, a woman journalist, and there was a certain social environment, and it was kind of attacking me and stuff. And so I felt that Alice Faiz and Faiz were very kind of conscious of my situation. So whenever I came across them in different meetings or something, I felt that I was being protected by them. And then
probably, I mean, like I said, they are really not that easily curable. So that's something, and just two anecdotes and then stop. One is about that sense of humor or making kind of the nice things out of tragedy. That poem, that Aaj Bazaar Mein, Papa Jaulan Chalo, which is provided in that little leaflet. Faiz says that, well, this is when he was in prison in Lahore. And the idea or the practice in Pakistan is that the prisoners, for their court hearings, they are taken in a van meant for prisoners, go from prison to the court, and then they have their hearing, and then they are kind of driven back to the prison. And on that one day, in wintry January day, that van broke down. So the prisoners had to be lugged to the court. So they said, well, they came up with an innovative solution. In those, this is the late 50s or early 60s. So they said, well, let's arrange some tonga, or the horse-drawn carriage. So they brought that and put these Faisal people in that. And of course, because they are prisoners, so of course they had to be kind of handcuffed and all that. And here's kind of the horse-drawn carriage, kind of going from prison to the court, and that's where he came up with this whole poem, that Aaj Bazaar Mein Papa Jaulan Chalo. So that's one anecdote. The third,
he said that the people started
recognize that, well, oh yeah, here is Faisal and all that. So following him, and so that's how, I mean, like, it became kind of a little procession, and that's when he penned that poem.
Last poem he wrote when he was in exile, I think. He was a very quiet man, and people could hardly understand, or he could hardly speak to people because they did not know what was going on in his mind, and he could not open up. So very often he would just sit and brood. Russell, his British critic, says that his friends, there was a lady before partition, he had friends with the pre-partition friends, and the young lady said, Colonel Brumble's long silences. Colonel Brumble, he was an honorary, he became an honorary officer in the British Army to do public relations after the Second World War. Okay, this is a poem where several of his couplets. मेरे मिलने वाले, ये आ गए मेरे मिलने वाले, वो दर खुला मेरे गम का देखा, वो आ गए मेरे मिलने वाले. I have it somewhere in my collection here. वो दर खुला मेरे गम का देखा, वो आ गए मेरे मिलने वाले. और वो मिलने वाले कौन है? वो आ गई शाम अपनी राहों में फर्शे अफसरदगी बिछाने. The evening comes. You can see inanimate things, scenes in the bush. वो आ गई शाम अपनी राहों में फर्शे अफसरदगी बिछाने. वो आ गई रात चांद तारों को अपनी आज़ुर्दगी सुनाने. वो सुबह आई दमकते निश्तर से याद के गम को मनाने. वो सुबह आई, वो दोपहर आई आस्ती में छुपाए शोलों के ताज़ियाने. You can various periods of the day, they come as persons, and he can personify nature. I mean, this is probably not my field. It's the field of the literary person.